Hello everyone, I'm here to talk to you about, you guessed it, a cartoon. Or maybe you had no idea what you were clicking on, but no matter. I'm here to talk to you about a little show, a little cartoon called Star vs. the Forces of Evil. Now yes, I know it's a cartoon, and the only other Blue Serum Talks was about an anime, but today it's just me, Zach, and although it is a cartoon, I'm not going to be focusing on the cartoon part of it, but instead I'm mainly going to focus on what the underlying messages are, the themes, the ideas behind the show. And let me tell you, they can get pretty serious. So, without further ado, roll that back to tank intro, and let's get on with this. Okay, so I'm going to give you a brief rundown of the general premise of the show before we get into more of the juicy bits that I talked about. The show's pilot episode introduces us to the two main characters, that being Marco Diaz and Star Butterfly, aka the show's namesake. Marco Diaz is a normal middle school boy. He's a goody two-shoes, as some would say. He's just about the most normal kid you can find. He does karate for fun. He has two loving but over-obsessive parents, and he has quite a boring life. He does well in school, and he's known as the safe kid. However, all of that changes when he meets Star, an extra-dimensional princess who wields a magical wand. Star hails from a different dimension than Earth. Her dimension is called Muni. This dimension is ruled by magical queens and is populated by Mumins, which are essentially humans, and also inhabits monsters. Star's wand is an heirloom that's been passed down from princess to princess, teaching all of the new princesses all of the magic that they need to know in order to rule the kingdom. While most queens have been prim and proper, Star prefers to take a little bit more of an aggressive approach to ruling with her magic. She likes to go on adventures and get herself into a lot of trouble. Because of this, Star's parents, the current king and queen, decide to send Star to a safer dimension to be raised in. That dimension being, you guessed it, Earth. Since Marco is known to be the safe kid and has such a normal life, him and his family are chosen to take in Star to their house and show her, how Earth works without magic, and so she can kind of, not be such a spaz all the time, and hopefully learn to be a better queen or something. Doesn't quite make sense, but that's not what we're here for. During the first two seasons, most episodes follow a similar plotline where Star gets into some trouble because she doesn't know how Earth works, and then one of the main villains shows up with a gang of monsters through a portal or something and tries to steal Star's wand, since it's a very powerful item. The two middle schoolers, Marco and Star, get along really well, especially when they're kicking monster butt, and we see time and time again that the two are more than capable of handling themselves, even against interdimensional monsters that, are crazy and stuff like that. So they always, win the day, and the villain never wins, right? Well, not quite. You see, starting with the last episode of Season 1, we see that the villains in Star vs. the Forces of Evil are not your run-of-the-mill villains. In fact, some of them are actually very competent. At the end of Season 1, a new villain has shown up and forced Star into a predicament where her best friend Marco at the time is entrapped and is going to die unless Star destroys her wand with a very specific spell that only wand users know. So right from the beginning, at the end of Season 1, we realize that it's not afraid to pull its punches, as Star loses her wand, loses her source of magic, and it delves into the depths of her returning to Muni, her homeworld, without the wand, and sort of having to tell her parents that, hey, I lost, and what are we going to do? Turns out there is a way to replace the wand, and that sort of never comes up again, but in destroying the wand and replacing the wand, she actually ended up giving half of the wand and half of its magical power to one of the villains in the process, unknowingly. So at the end of Season 1 and into Season 2 and Season 3, we actually kind of have two sides of the story where one obviously is Star with her half wand back, and the other side is actually the villain with also half the wand. And we see that the magic that comes from the wand is very dependent on who is wielding it. Star has trouble using magic at times because when she gets very emotional or angry or sad, it messes with her ability to use magic. As the villain finds out very early on that if he focuses his hatred and his anger, then he can actually use the magic to be much more destructive. And it sort of creates an interesting dynamic of the villain kind of going crazy with power, who otherwise in the show wouldn't have been very powerful at all. Later on in season 2, the villain who has part of the wand actually manages to steal Star's spellbook, which is essentially a culmination of all of the different spells all of the past princesses and queens have made. So essentially all of her family heritage had been stolen from her by the main villain. And just another point of this show is not afraid to pull his punches and say, no, she lost. She loses. The villain won. So ever since the villain, his name is Ludo, had gotten the spellbook, we continue to see his sort of storyline as he's kind of delving into these new powers. Finally, the citizens of Muni, mainly the king and queen, are alerted that Ludo is back in Muni and plans to, take over the kingdom, as that's kind of his goal with getting the wand from Star in the first place. So Star is faced with one of the hardest decisions of her life. It's not even a decision she can make because it's made for her. She has to leave Earth, leave her friends, leave Marco, leave everything behind because her homeworld is now in serious danger because Ludo has a wand and the spellbook that'll teach him everything he needs to know to take over the entire kingdom. So season 2 ends with a very heartfelt goodbye between Star and Marco. If you haven't seen the show, there's no real way to explain it besides it makes you very on edge to see season 3. And season 3 continues the story with Ludo actually ending up taking over the kingdom. Again, it's not afraid to pull its punches. They lose to Ludo amongst other villains that have joined him, other main villains. But despite that, Star is still plotting against him, and everyone sort of gets involved, and they end up taking the kingdom back in the end, but not without some very close calls and a lot of character development between Star, Marco, and her parents, Star's parents, as they were very close to losing everything. After that, it goes into Eclipses Story, which, for those of you who don't know, Eclipsa was a queen that ruled centuries ago, but she used dark magic, and people didn't really like her. She was seen as a tyrant because she allowed monsters to rampage through the city. She was married to a monster. Oh no. And that monster ate people, and it was awful. So she was sealed away in a crystal, actually, for all these centuries. But due to a new villain that has risen that is immortal, they need Eclipsa and her dark magic in order to beat him. Because the only way to beat an immortal being is with a spell that can kill immortal beings, and that's some pretty dark stuff. Stuff that's even locked away that you can't read in the spellbook because the queens after her decided that it's too dark of an area to go. And as they have to free Eclipsa in order to beat this villain that threatens Muni once again, Star gets to know Eclipsa a little bit better. Obviously, Eclipsa is not allowed to have a wand. She's not allowed out of a prison cell. But nevertheless, Star gets to know her better, and she learns that actually maybe Eclipsa wasn't so bad after all. It turns out, yes, she was married to a monster, but that's only just because she loved the monster. And the monster wasn't actually all that bad either. He, wasn't the murderer that everyone knew him as. And her quote-unquote dark magic was maybe a little bit more edgy than other queens were used to, but if used in the right hands, there was nothing wrong with it. At least that's what Star thought. And that's what, obviously, Eclipsa thought, because she didn't think what she was doing was so wrong. So this is where the story kind of gets a little bit more deep, because under certain events, the current Queen Moon is lost in a different dimension and unable to return. So Star has to take over as active queen when she figures out that actually Eclipsa had a child with the monster, and in the official records, that child was swapped out with a pure Mumin child, whereas the real Mumin child is half Mumin, half monster. And so from that point on, the lineage wasn't actually the true lineage of royalty. So it turns out Star and her family, her entire family, is kind of a fraud. And so as acting queen, Star decides, you know what, this whole, thing is a sham. I shouldn't be here. I'm not rightfully queen. My mom isn't rightfully queen. So she makes the terrible, maybe not terrible, but hard decision of giving the entire queenship back to Eclipsa, who rightfully deserves it. Needless to say, the people of Muni aren't happy about this choice, because they quite liked the current queen, and giving it back to Eclipsa, who is known to be an awful queen, who is written in the history books to be the Queen of Darkness, so many things, the monster lover, the hater of Mumins. They're not very happy about it, but Star does her best to help Eclipsa kind of get back accustomed to being queen. She does her best to get the people back on her side, and that's most of what Season 4 is. Now, I'm not going to spoil the ending of Season 4, which is the end of the whole show, but I am going to get on to the meat of this video, which is the themes and such that go on kind of the background of Star that makes it such a good and impactful show. So, as we discussed in the overview section, reoccurring theme 1, I would like to point out, is the theme of Star's imperfection. Namely, Star's naivety, her lack of experience. Time and time again, Star messes up, and not just because the villain was too powerful, but because of her own sort of selfishness, or her misuse of the wand, which is another pretty frequent one. She's not able to beat the villain, and she has to destroy her wand in order to save her friend. She has to give up all that power. She loses the spellbook. She has to tell her parents that she lost. She lost her family's history. She has all of these things that she has to deal with. She has to be acting queen and fails to do what the people want. She fails the people in holding the castle. She loses the castle. Like, Muni Castle is taken over, like, at least 2 times in the entire thing, because Star just isn't perfect. She's not good enough to run the kingdom, let alone be a good daughter to her parents or a good friend to Marco. It's a really hard thing to swallow, because, as is kind of a custom in nowadays culture, she's portrayed as the strong female protagonist who can kick monster butt. She can take names and chew bubblegum and look cool while doing it, but as opposed to other shows that's the only side of the character. In Star vs. the Forces of Evil, the main character, Star, and Marco on occasion, do have their shortcomings. They lose quite a lot. And that's not to say that they always lose. I will admit that most of the arcs, most of the storylines do have a happy ending at some point, but a lot of times the season finale would be a low point. It would be, hey, things aren't going so well, and, maybe this will be it for our merry band of misfits. That being said, we do see Star's growth as a character, because in the beginning she's kind of helpless to save Marco or to keep the spellbook from being stolen, but in seasons 3 and 4 especially, we see Star mature in very meaningful ways. She ends up almost running the kingdom for Eclipsa, because Eclipsa is not liked by the people. She has to do a lot of work And we see a big difference between season 1 Star and season 4 Star, where now she's, has almost complete control over her powers. She doesn't need a wand to cast magic anymore. She is able to fess up to her mistakes. She's able to admit when she was wrong. She relies on other people. She's a very intelligent person. She always knows what's right, even if she can't do it. She knows what has to be done and what she needs to do, even if she's not quite good enough. But yeah, that's actually one of the lesser themes, one of the less strong themes. It's a more common theme. It's not quite as common as I would like in modern cartoons, I guess. But it's still nice to see it when a cartoon brings character depth to this level, because a lot of shows simply don't have that. And for a cartoon, especially on Disney, to have that kind of character development is very good. And it's what initially pulled me into the series. But as you'll see later, there are a lot of bigger themes and issues that go on behind the scenes that make it an even more interesting story that they tell. So, moving on to the second theme, very present in Star vs. the Forces of Evil. Now, this theme, I would say, is less obvious as the first theme, as maybe a young child watching the show wouldn't notice it, and maybe a lot of casual watchers won't notice it, but that is the theme of integrated racism in our society. Now, I'm no politician, I'm no sociologist, I don't know things like this, but what I do know is that racism is a thing, and Star vs. the Forces of Evil, I think, encaptures a lot of what racism is in our society. And that's shown in the show as the relationship between humans and monsters. Two sides of a conflict that both, happen in the same world. They both live in the same world, but each side hates the other. We get small little snippets of, Star is always fighting monsters, but that doesn't make the monsters any less human than, Star is. At one point, once Ludo is defeated, actually a lot of the monsters are repentful, I guess you could say, but they are shown to, be more human than we first saw in the first couple seasons. Star befriends a lot of monsters and realizes not all monsters are monsters. Take that as you will, but this is reinforced when we meet Eclipsa and her monster husband, who, when we meet, is actually a really nice guy. It's even noted that he's a vegetarian, so he wouldn't even eat people even if he wanted to. But it's really hammered in that the monsters are just as good as humans. And this, I should note that once Eclipsa became ruler again, became queen again, she allowed monsters back inside the kingdom instead of having to live outside the kingdom. They were allowed back in, which upset a lot of the humans. So in one episode after Eclipsa became queen again, it was all about a sports festival, or a sports game in particular, one specific game. And the game is called Cornball, but it's not an actual game. Just imagine kind of like a football type thing. So what had happened was it was like a national event, so like there was a bunch of different people there. A bunch of the top players, both monsters and humans, were sort of scrambled up, and two team leaders were picked, and the monster team leader picked all monsters, and the human team leader picked humans, all humans, sorry. Star was like, hey, we're supposed to kind of be integrating and be friends with each other and play with each other, not just against each other. And they were like, no way, I don't want to play with those monsters because they're monsters. And then the monsters were like, no way, I don't want to play with those humans because they're humans. And, the humans are complaining, like, obviously the monsters have an upper hand because, monsters can range from, like, fish to spiders to octopus to slime monsters, a whole bunch of different things. It's not like it's a fair fight. Imagine a football game of a bunch of animals like tigers against humans. obviously the tigers are going to win because they are stronger than the humans. So chaos ensues as the humans accuse the monsters of cheating, and the monsters accuse the humans of cheating. Meanwhile, Star's trying to get everything under control. She's trying to make it easy for Eclipsa to be queen, because Eclipsa, too, also wants, humans and monsters to live in harmony. And it's just going awfully until they notice, like, hey, where's my kids? They're like, oh crap, we gotta go look for our kids. In all the confusion, everyone's kids have wandered off somewhere. So, what could have happened to them? And they use this moment to tell the audience and almost to tell each other, hey, you're a parent and I'm a parent. We both care about our kids. We have to work together to find them. But it turns out, so they all grouped up and were like, hey, we got to find our kids because that's what's actually important, not this silly football game. And it turns out the kids had gone off to play their own game of cornball. And in this game of cornball, all of the kids were getting along. The monsters, the humans, they were all just, having fun. And as you can tell, the kind of message behind that is, the kids don't see a monster or a human. They just see another kid that they can play with. And that's a big moment in Season 4, is that maybe there is some hope for the two species to get along. Maybe there is some hope for a future of integrated society where the kids grow up not caring. Even after that, the parents are still seen to kind of be douchebags to the other species. And, you kind of have the thought of, wow, it's going to take a while, but the kids are going to hopefully grow up not to hate people based on what they look like, or how many eyes they have, or how many arms they have, or what color they are, whether they're pink or purple or, a human. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that in its own child-friendly way, it does a very good job at explaining sort of, I don't know if this is the right term, but integrated racism into society. Because even though these people realize that their parents, they're just like us, we care about our kids, they care about our kids, they have their homes, and we have our homes, and we both live our lives. Even though they realize all of that, they still have this just inborn hatred for monsters because they have the feeling that they're dangerous in some way. In one episode, they're at a monster's house, and they play a board game where the humans eat the monster babies. And then later, they find out that there's an exactly the same board game, but you're a human and the monsters eat your babies. Like, it's both sides that are guilty of it, and it shows it in a very child-friendly manner that, like, hey, it doesn't matter what they look like. It doesn't matter if they're a monster or a human or a frog or a bird or a demon. We can all get along. So there's my 2 cents about, I don't know, Star versus the Forces of Evil's take on racism. Because it doesn't just vilify racists. It doesn't just say that they're wrong for hating each other. Because, there have been human and monster wars, They have a very violent history. It's not saying, don't be afraid of anyone because everyone's nice. It just says, get to know someone before you think you're afraid of them. Just because the past is the past doesn't mean that it's going to repeat itself and that the future can't be better. The future is everything we have to look forward for. It's those kids playing with each other. It's, not the grumpy old guys who, think that monsters can't be trusted. It's. And part of that is because Star is still a kid. And she is, in line to be queen. And having her have that willingness to trust monsters is important to the kingdom as a whole. Anyways, I think I've talked enough about racism, especially because I'm not probably qualified to talk about it. But yeah, I'd like to see what your guys' thoughts are on this, if you've seen the show, and if not, what you're kind of thinking. If I'm sounding crazy or not, let me know. Now for the last thing I want to talk about today. So all in all today, I just want to let you know about a great show that I've been enjoying for a couple years now. And more importantly, I wanted to let you know that some cartoons are more than meets the eye. I do encourage you to check out the show if you haven't already, and if I haven't spoiled too much of it. I tried to be as spoiler-free as possible. I didn't even touch the last, couple episodes. Hey, so be proud of me for that. You can stream the show on like Disney's streaming app, whatever, as long as you have a cable provider that provides Disney XD. And with that, I ask you all to like the video, subscribe, share it with your friends, give it a thumbs up or whatever. And if I got anything wrong in this video, feel free to let me know down in the comments. If you have any extra thoughts or opinions, let me know down in the comments as well. And I hope to see you all, hopefully, a little bit sooner this time. Goodbye.